That night, the dry scratching brought with it a man collapsed, and a baby smelling of milk. She said a single word, "No," and the whole West stepped into the small kitchen. From the knife pinning the letter to the fire licking the stable, from the earth pit to the porch step, each object would decide for them. Latch stopped halfway, wool blanket spread, the soot mark keeping the secret to the end. The knocking that night was not quite knocking, only like fingernails scraping wood. Wren still opened. I stood in the kitchen, hands still carrying the smell of soap from washing cups. The man collapsed onto the porch like a sack of hay dipped in water. On his chest was a small child wrapped in a faded wool blanket. The door latch dropped loose because Wren pulled too fast. No one spoke, only the baby's breath pushing evenly under the damp wool. Wren knelt. I pulled a chair closer. The man's wrists were dark with bruises, his shoes split at the heel. The skin of his hands carried dry dust like old stove ash. Wren opened the wool blanket at just one small corner, placed the back of her hand on the baby's belly to feel if it was still warm. Then she wedged an extra shirt into the wrapping. No question. The light outside the gate cast the shadow of a horse breathing hard. 3 steps stopped in the sagebrush. Before the latch could be set, the voice came. "Anyone run through here?" A familiar voice. It was the sheriff who passed the cactus crossing every week. His gun hung slant across his chest, horse pawing, patient. Wren leaned on the doorframe, hand resting on the wood, thumb pressing the old crack. "No," she said, voice even like rain falling into a tin basin. I saw the door latch lying there, neither fastened nor fully open. The sheriff looked inside for exactly one breath, tipped his hat. The horse turned. The dust from his coat brushed the row of wild pineapple at the gate. The porch boards heard the sift of sand. Wren lifted the latch one notch. We carried the man inside, laid him out by the stove. The wool blanket covered the baby again, the second time, to keep still in a stranger's house. Life's pace changed, at least in the sound of footsteps. Another pair of boots across the worn floor, another breath in the still night. The man called himself Colt when waking, half dreaming, spoke hoarsely, then silent. The child slept more than cried. Things came as they would. Wren hauled water from the well. I split stakes to replace fence boards. Colt waited for no order. He went straight to the stable edge, found the hand hammer, nailed down where heads had lifted. Each time, gatepost with a bone-handled knife. No envelope, no postal stamp. The paper thick, edges stiff. On the surface were a few taunting lines, scrolled carelessly. If the debtor was not given up, they would take the rest. Wren left the paper there through a full round of sun. She did not read it aloud. She did not ask. I pulled the knife, set it on the windowsill. Colt carried the child inside, passed the paper as if passing a warped plank, not letting it touch his shirt, but not avoiding it either. In the afternoon, Wren went to the stable, opened the hatch of the small cellar beneath the kitchen floor. She did not say "in case," did not say "if." She wiped dust from the stair rungs, placed an oil lamp on the last step. On the table, the paper lay flat like a piece of hide left in the sun. Rain had not come, no smell of wet grass, only a kind of silence with a tongue sliding into every seam of the wood. The next morning but one, another paper hung on the fence wire. Printed letters, no handwriting. A 3-day limit, Below was a grease mark drawing, a snake coiled around a bird's feather. I brought it into the kitchen. Wren looked at it for exactly the time to pour a cup of water. Colt leaned against the door, eyes fixed on the crack in the water trough. No one opened their mouth. Wren tore the paper into 2 pieces, dropped each half into the cold stove ash pan. The fire did not flare. Only pale smoke rose, thin. She pressed lightly with the ladle handle. Ash covered the letters. Done. Colt began another round of checking. He reset the stack of bricks by the west window. I stretched more wire on the second fence line, hid spring traps under dry straw. Wren walked the house, touched the door latch 3 times, front, side, back. At each place she lifted the latch, lowered it. Listening to it hit metal with one single click, like the work of an old acquaintance. The baby was placed in the cellar in a wicker basket lined with straw. The wool blanket over it, beside the basket a cup of cold milk. I turned the lamp up 1 notch, then lowered the wick so it would burn long without smoke. The horses in the yard caught the scent of strangers before we did. Dust rose from the dry gulch to the south. Not much. 4 of them. Steps unhurried. The first man wore a red scarf. His gun hung loose as if for chopping wood. Colt held the long barrel already cleaned, smooth. Wren did not say stay or come. She only lowered the door latch and pulled the stove aside from the crack under the floor. That gesture slid through the gap behind the stable. Pistol grip brushing a dry mangrove root. I lay belly flat behind the chicken coop, stock tight to the ground until it numbed. Colt did not hide. He stood on the porch step, raised the barrel to chest height as if setting a cane for a tired man to lean on. The first shot from him shaved the roof tile, dropped 1. Colt's shot struck the shoulder. The scarfed man bent, fell from the saddle. The horse jerked hard, dragging him across the graveled earth. 2 others spread out, looking for a place to fire. Wren pulled the trigger once from beside the stable. 1 man fell backward into a pile of old baskets, mouth full of stalks. The last saw fire running up his saddle edge, panicked, swung his hand to beat it, then fled, not looking back. The smell of burning rose from the wood thrown beside the stable. The fire spat in short bursts through the damp knots. We carried water, bucket after bucket. No one shouted up, no one claimed. Only sweat falling and the slap of water on hot wood. That night we dug. The earth at the hill's edge was hard as if baked for years. The shovel hit with a thunk like striking something dried to the bone. When done, Wren set a flat stone on each mound. No name, no mark. Colt sat on the porch step, soot still on his hands. I took a rag, wiped the rifle barrel, left the shine pointed toward the dark patch of grass. That night the latch was set tight to the last notch. We did not discuss whether they'd come back. On the stove, the ash pan still held a corner of paper unburned, but the letters had blurred. Morning, the stable still gave thin smoke, like breath after fever. The horse stood on 1 leg, sometimes blowing through its nose, as if remembering the night. Wren shook the wool blanket on the porch, fine dust lifting in a dim strip, falling to the step. The child slept in the basket. A hand reached out from under the wool, nails the size of half a grain of rice. Colt repaired the stable roof with the rhythm of one who had fixed more roofs than spoken words. He lifted each beam, then paused exactly 1 beat before nailing, as if asking the nail if it wanted to go there. I stood below, passing wood. Wren brought out 3 tin cups, their touch sounding cold. No praise, just set them on the porch step, near the soot mark from the night. The sheriff passed near at midday, did not dismount, hat tilted over half his eyes, the glance sliding like wind over water. He touched the brim, then looked at the door latch once, quick. No papers, no questions. He turned the reins. The horse brushed dust, moved on. Breath, then closed the lid. Wren did not ask whose. She pushed the chest against the wall, set her father's old guitar on top. From then, the papers became a table prop, not a threat, not a fortune. Only weight to keep the table steady. Rain came late, not heavy, just enough to draw a few dark lines on the dry ground. Wren set a basin on the porch to catch each drop. The sound of water into tin was like a stranger knocking with a tired finger. She pulled the wool blanket tight over the wicker basket once more, so the damp would not slip into the child's neck. I walked the fence after rain. The barbed wire had begun to rust yellow, clinging to my fingertips with a taste of metal. At the third post, the old bone-handled knife from the stranger still held dry earth in its groove. I rinsed it under the spout, wiped it clean, then hung it on the nail by the stove. Not a trophy, only to remember the nail could still take one more weight. The house's rhythm settled into things that needed no speaking. One swept soot from the trough. One honed the plane blade. One lulled the child with a repeated motion, pulling the corner of the wool blanket over the shoulder, letting it slip down at a slant. He did it the same each time. The hand did not shake. Over time, the shake found somewhere else to stay, like it left the body. One day the wind shifted. The grass stood upright again for a short stretch. A few wing beats dropped to the edge of the stable, then flew off, leaving a feather caught on a nail. Wren hung the wool blanket on the line, the old patch showing clearer in the sun. The child began pushing himself to the rim of the basket. Wren cleared the porch space, propped an extra flat board, set the wool blanket down like a borrowed piece of ground. The child braced his hands, crawled a few spans, then dropped to sit, staring at Colt's boots by the door. The weak head wobbled, eyes blinking. No shout, no coaxing words. That day, the latch was not set to the last notch. Wren left it stopped in the middle, where the click was faint, not deep as usual. On the table, the only paper left in the house was the folded land deed, wedged in the gap of the wood. No one pulled it out. No one discussed whose name stood first. It lay there like a tin sheet under a hot cup, to keep the wood from burning. At dusk, Colt sat on the porch step, back against the post, hands resting still on his knees. The rifle hung high on the old nail, not within reach, not counted as gone. Wren wiped the rag at her feet, glancing up now and then at the strip of sky caught between the two roofs. I sat. Soot mark from the ash pan the day we burned the paper still drew a thin, gray line, never fully wiped. In the porch corner, the bone-handled knife hung silent like a coat hook long unused. The wind carried a smell of damp earth, not rain, likely just a cold draft circling through the dry gulch. The child pushed up, bracing against my leg, leaning. His hand was warm. I set my hand at his back, not lifting him, only keeping him from falling into the space between porch and step. He stood for one beat, then sat down on the wool blanket. That was enough. Inside, the old clock ticked small, like a restless sleeper turning over. At the gate, no paper remained. Only the round hole the knife had left. A round hole not filled. We left it there, like people leave a crack in the step to remember where their foot once pressed too hard. Night had arrived without full dark. I closed my hands around the still warm tin cup. Wren rose, folded the wool blanket in half, set it on the step. The latch stayed in the middle notch. We did not count stars, did not tell stories. The earth heard us breathe and kept still. The scratching was not like knocking. It was like a dry fingernail dragging on wood, one short line, stopping, then another. I stood in the kitchen, hands still with the faint smell of soap, the wet tin cup turned upside down on the cloth. The cold stove held only red embers, the flame drawn back like a tired body. Wren passed by me without a word. She set her fingertip on the door latch. The iron hook was cold, with a hair-thin line of rust. The door opened a crack, the yard wind spilling in with the smell of dust and sage. The man fell into the porch like a bundle of straw thrown down. His whole body pitched forward, shoulder hitting the frame, sliding to the floor. On his chest was a child, wrapped in a faded wool blanket, damp at one corner. I saw water darkening the line of the old patch, gathering into a deep mark. His shoes were split at the heel. His hands carried dry dust, nails broken, the backs with fine hair stuck with grit. The scorch of sun and old sweat caught in my throat like the taste of iron. He did not groan, only short, broken breaths. The latch dropped loose because Wren pulled too fast. The bar struck the plate with a clipped click, then hung. The porch lamp felt the wind, swung one slow arc, its cord giving a faint squeal. On the wood step, grains of sand slid from his heel, falling into a small line. Hum, then quiet. In the kitchen, the old clock's hand stuck slightly, creaking at the 4. Wren eased the blanket's edge with her thumb, not pulling hard. The child's cheek showed red from resting against it. The lips faintly blue, breathing dotted like someone tired after crying. She set the back of her hand to its belly, waited. I heard the faint breath from its nose, even as a needle touching cloth. Shirt, Wren said one word. I brought the old shirt from the chair back, its seam loose at the shoulder. She folded it in half, wedged it into the wrap to fill the damp space. The wool drew in, fabric edges touching, holding the warmth. I saw the child's wrist pale, faint green veins under the skin. The man stayed still, head turned, the shadow under his cheekbone deepened by the swaying porch light. I lifted my fingers to his neck, not to call, just to know there was a beat. A faint beat under the dust. On his shirt, the second button was gone. The buttonhole widened like a clamshell. Wren pulled the wool up higher, her hand passing over the child's hair, stopping at the nape, holding for 2 breaths, then letting go. She shifted the small bundle into my arm, light as an empty bowl, yet my shoulder tightened for fear of slipping. The wool touched my skin, damp and clinging cold. I set the bundle by the stove, on the chair I had pulled up. The embers cast up, not enough to bother the child, just enough to dry the damp edge of the seam. The smell of wet wool turned to the clean smell of something aired again. I trimmed the lamp wick a little, the light more yellow, steady. Wren took a clean cloth from the drawer, folded it in 2, set it under the man's head so it wouldn't scrape the rough floor. I heard the floor give a faint sound as the weight shifted. Dust lay in his hair, clinging to her fingertips. She brushed once, it fell into a small gray spot on the floor. I poured warm water into a small bowl, tested it against my wrist, not hot. Wren touched it to the child's lips, 1 drop. Its lips wet, a little pinker. It shut its eyes tighter, then loosened, like someone shifting into a warmer place. We said nothing more. On the table by the stove, the old oil lamp cast shadow over the curved wooden ladle. The ladle's shadow like a leaf blade. On the wall, the coat nail trembled without sound. The yard wind came through the open crack, making the coarse curtain billow like a breath. The sound of a horse. Not fast. 4 hooves touching dry ground in rhythm, stopping in the sage at the gate. I looked at Wren. She adjusted the blanket to settle, stepped to the door, and on the latch. The latch still hung loose, not set. She did not lift it. She only stood exactly a hand's span. The gun hung across his chest, the reins taut enough, not jerking. "Anyone run through here?" His voice was not sharp. I heard it like a shadow passing, not pressing down. The smell of seasoned leather hung at the gate, the old gunpowder mixing with the rider's sweat. Wren did not turn back toward the stove. She stood as she had from the start. "No," she said, voice even, dropping to the floor like water into an upside-down tin cup. No shatter, no splash, just the sound. The sheriff tipped his hat slightly. That told me. His eyes had looked inside for exactly 1 breath. I did not move aside. My hand still rested on the chair arm, 1 finger touching the edge of the wool blanket. The child breathed, 2 short beats. No other horse sound, no chain. Only the sage leaves brushing each other for a short stretch, then still. He nodded, pulled the reins. The front hoof scraped a line, sand lifting off, leaving a dark mark like ink. The horse turned, tail sweeping the wild pineapple row, rustling. Wren lifted the door latch 1 notch. A small, neat click. Not the sound of locking tight, just the sound of putting something back where it belonged. The door was still left with a crack open. Enough for wind to pass through, not enough for a question to stay. I brought the bowl of warm water closer, keeping the warmth from slipping out through the crack. Wren touched the tip of her finger to the man's forehead, testing for damp and warm again. I shifted hands to hold the wool blanket, pulled the edge back exactly 1 inch so it wouldn't press against the child's nose. He opened his mouth, closed it again, as if testing the smell of air. The sheriff had left the gate, the sound of hooves fading. Dust fell to the porch in a thin film, settling on the rim of the tin cup I had left out. I wiped that dust line with a dry cloth, folded the cloth in 4, set it neatly on the chair arm. The door latch did not move again. Wren stepped around me, lifted the hem of the man's shirt lightly to see if it was a deep tear or only bruising. At his side, a large purple mark, skin tight. She did not sigh. She took a cloth strip, tied it loosely around his waist to hold where the bandage would go later. I heard the fabric pull against itself, a sound small as hands scrubbing a wooden bowl after a meal. The coal stove gave a faint sound as the coals settled. I took the poker, turned them a little. Red showed under the ash, not glaring. Water in the kettle rose 1 small bubble, split and vanished. I poured some into a tall-necked jug, set it near the chair, ready. The child shifted, a thin sound like a thread pulled tight, then let go. Wren did not fold the wool blanket further. She only smoothed the edge, pressed the seam flat. Each movement, as if done many times before, neither clumsy nor stopping halfway. The things that needed saying were already in how she set her hand. In the scattered notes, the wind turned its back, bringing in the smell of cold ash from the day before. The latch at mid-notch had a fine dust clinging to its rim, a faint line visible only when tilting the head. I touched it. The dust stuck to my skin like chalk. I went to get another thin blanket, not wool, laid it under the man so the wood floor wouldn't draw out the heat. When I lifted him, his shirt made a steady, dry fabric sound. On the shoulder was a patch of dry salt, white, like a limestone mark. I didn't scrape it, left it. Wren poured a capful of liquor into the bowl of warm water, the sharp smell spreading in a short ring before settling. She soaked a cloth, set it on the bruise, held it a moment. Her hand did not shake. Her wrist was thin, one green vein raised. I turned the lamp wick lower so the yellow light wouldn't bother the child. The light lay still on the wool blanket, clinging to the fibers, making it look thicker. I heard the old clock pause again at the 4, then agree to move on. We had not spoken any name, had not called anyone anything. Names would wait. For now there was only the latch at its chosen notch, the wool blanket warming, and the dust-wet man taking up a patch of floor. The kitchen had taken on the smell of skin, of wool, of liquor mixed with warm water, layered over the cheap soap still on my hands. Wren stood straight, looked through the door crack once more, nothing beyond but the mossed fence and the sage bending its head. She tapped the latch once lightly with her forefinger, as if to hear again the earlier click. That sound did not repeat. She withdrew her hand, turned toward the stove. I pulled a chair closer, set my finger in the child's palm for him to close on. The hand closed, soft, tightening, then loosening. The wool touched my wrist, the warmth now certain. Inside, everything was in its place. Ladle on the table, tin cup upside down, cloth folded in 4. Latch settled between 2 intentions. No promises, no vows. Only the next thing to do, in line, quiet. The house had one more breath in it. No need to look, to know. The stove held heat longer. The coals gathered into a round red spot like a fire ant's eye. On the floor, the strange boots sounded softly on the loose boards. A small knock where the join was slack, a thin thud where the plank was splintered. Colt stood only to reach for a hammer, asking no one where it was. He pulled the long drawer, brought out the nail box with wood shavings inside, chose each one, touched the nail head to his tongue to wet it, then set the point to the raised plank. His other arm held the wool blanket with a spreading milk smell, keeping the child against his sternum. Of cloth into the gap so it wouldn't tilt. The child stirred once, the wool tightening at the seam, the stitches fraying in faint strands. Colt lowered his holding arm, his hand cupped like a wooden ladle to fit the child's nape. He gave 2 more strikes, moved to the next plank, breathing steady, sweat marking a circle into his gray collar. Outside, the wind worked the sage to a dry sound. The latch stayed at mid-notch, holding a thin line of light on the floor. Each time Colt passed, the boards kept the step's rhythm, repeating a short score. Knock, still knock. The kettle murmured at the stove edge, not boiling. I added a pinch of coal. The fire didn't flare, only spread low like a red thread along the rim of old coals. He chose a long nail for the plank near the table leg. The strike was harder, the nail going straight, the boards back, settling a bit. I held the blanket's edge so it wouldn't touch the fresh planed surface, still sharp. The smell of milk mixed with new wood, the old damp wool scent faded. Wren set a clean cloth on the chair, said briefly, "Leave it." The west window was open a finger's width, laying fine dust across Colt's shoulder, catching the pale hairs on his arm. For the last nail, the hammer fell slower. The head lay flat, reflecting a yellow ring from the lamp. Colt put the hammer back in the box, the nail box giving a single loose rattle. He didn't pick it up. The child took a breath, longer than usual, lips parting. He stopped his hand. The stove heard that draw of air clearly, then nothing. By morning, a paper was already at the gate, not left in the way people leave things. It was pinned straight into the gatepost, with the bone-handled knife. The blade sank halfway, the wood scored with a slant line. Sunlight licked the paper's thick edge, showing pits like grains of sand stuck there. No envelope, no ink seal. Only a few hurried lines, dark ink bleeding on the downstrokes, dry on the upstrokes. Wren left it as it was. She did not pull the knife, did not take the paper down. She stood slightly turned, looked at the paper's corner for a beat, then went in. I passed the gate with the broom in hand, stopped 7 steps away, looking at the faint hand mark on the bone handle, polished by someone else's sweat. The knife's tip trembled slightly in the wind, making the paper tap the wood with the smallest even sounds. Colt carried the child past, did not touch. He looked once, eyes resting on the knife's pierce hole. His shoulder pulled the wool blanket up to shield the child's neck from the sun. The smell of milk and the smell of a child's skin passed over the old ink scent. The child slept, lips holding the blanket's edge, leaving a round, damp mark under the gate post, the water reflecting a brief bright spot onto the paper before fading. Flies circled where the smell of dried hide hung from the beam nearby, not landing on the paper. I took white chalk, marked a line across the post at the knife's depth, to remember it if we needed to compare later. The wood gave a faint crack when the sun shifted. I bent to pick up an old rope fallen near, fiber dust clinging to my fingertips. Wren passed, pulling her shirt hem to keep it from brushing the paper's edge. She did not read aloud. The paper stayed there like a piece of hide drying, its surface dry but its core still faintly damp, letting the ink scent out in slow measure. Inside, the tin cup on the table sat open-mouthed, a thin layer of dust catching on the rim, visible when tilted in the light. I turned it upside down. The metal struck wood in a neat sound. At the gate, the bone-handled knife still bent lightly with the wind. The horse in the stall lifted its head to look, then bent to the old straw again. By noon, Wren opened the cellar hatch beneath the stove. Her hand took the rusted iron ring, lifted slowly so the hinge wouldn't squeal. The hatch scraped the wood lip, showing the mouth of steps leading down to dark. The cool earth smell rose, cold like the surface of a bowl before soup. She knelt, used a rag to wipe each step from top to bottom, pulling all dust into small rolls. I stood above, using a small shovel to push the scraps into a wicker basket. She set an oil lamp on the last step, low, round-bodied black crust still around its neck. She turned the wick, tested the flame. It caught slow, first pale violet, then yellow, then steady. The light held the last 2 steps, enough to see where the basket would be if needed. On the cellar wall, last year's soot streak still ran from the east corner down, as if someone had once brought fire in and set it upside down. Wren stepped up, closed the hatch. It fit tight, the sound of wood on wood like closing a book. She stood straight, walked out to the kitchen. At the kitchen door was its own latch, smaller, sliding across a metal hook. Wren tested it up and down once. Pull, click, drop, click. The wood shook very little, enough to know the catch still held. I dipped a rag into the basin, wrung it, wiped the inside face of the door where hands often rested. The black film ran off into the cloth, leaving the bare grain clear. Wren went toward the front door, the outer latch still at mid-notch. She touched the latch head, did not lift, only left her finger there for exactly 1 beat, then drew it back. In the kitchen, Colt stacked the cloths, set the water jug and bowl on the flat wooden tray. He pulled a chair to the hatch door, as if measuring if the width would pass. The wool blanket for the child had dried at the damp edge, softened where it had once been table. The salt in the jar had clumped from the earth's damp just risen. I used a wooden spoon to break it apart. The faint rattle like very soft rain on a far tin roof. The cellar lamp was turned down, flame out, saving oil. The lamp oil smell still lingered in the air, thin. No one said in case. No one said certain. We only did what could be done in order. By noon, another paper, this time with a clear mark, snake around feather. The black grease set in a ring, still slick to the fingertips. 3-day limit, written in straight strokes, no flourish. The wind flipped the paper's edge, a rasp like a dulled blade drawn over old hide. I took it from the fence wire, read with my eyes, not aloud. Wren did not ask what it says. The paper lay face down on the table for a while, then went back to where it had come. Hung on the second wire line, 3.5 steps from the first post, where the bone-handled knife was still buried. I walked the fence, checking each twist. At a loose spot, the wire had slipped from its nail. I turned the pliers, pulled the wire back, tightened, until the metal scrape changed from dull to clear. Sweat fell from my forehead to my hand, mixed with dust, leaving a pale streak like thin milk. I set another post in the gap, drove it to the ankle. The dry earth resisted. I used the wooden mallet. It bounced twice before staying. Colt stacked bricks under the west window, 3 in the first row, 2 above, staggered. He measured the height by eye, set a thin board across to check level. Every brick had one chipped corner, one mossed face, the old mark of last year's rain. He spread a burlap sack underfoot so the bricks wouldn't knock, dusted his hands of red powder, patted it onto his trouser leg. The sun's shadow slid across the sill, cutting into the table's edge. The tin cup, upright since morning, now had a ring of water beneath it, spreading like a coin mark. Wren hung the thick curtain on the west window, leaving a 2-finger gap, enough to see the stable without showing shape. She pinned the curtain's hem with one wooden peg, the second at an angle, so it wouldn't sway in wind. I untied another loose fence strand, knotted it with a double hitch I'd learned in drought cattle days. The knot sat clean. The sky moved from sun to cloud. I didn't take it down. The post now had a fingernail mark I'd scratched, shallow, showing touch. We went back inside, letting the wind keep reading what hung out there. In the kitchen, the back latch was still after the last check. The hatch lay flush, edges tight. The bricks under the west window were set. The fence wire was taut. Nothing loud, only the old clock passing the 4 without pause, and the lamp oil smell still thin in the air like a word unwritten. Gray noon. The sun swallowed by cloud, leaving a soft light without shadow. The paper on the fence still moved, the snake a round feather like a smear of waste oil. Wren stepped out, slid it from the wire without a jerk, letting the rawhide slip through her hand without fight. She brought it into the kitchen, set it on the table beside the worn wooden ladle. The ash pan sat still under the stove. Ash pale gray, coarse and fine mixed, the cold smell of old fires. Wren tore the paper with both hands, no knife, the tear not straight. One half went on the ash. The other laid over it at a slant. She turned the ladle over, pressed down. Ash closed over the paper edge, pale smoke standing thin, not stinging the eyes. She lifted the ladle, ash clinging, falling slow, like a sentence swallowed halfway. No one said, "Time now." No one said, "They'll come." Wren loosened her apron tie, washed her hands in the basin, cold. She didn't dry them right away, letting drops fall to the floor. I set a cloth over the ash pan to keep the ash from lifting. The lamp wick was turned down another notch. The flame sunk. Still there, like someone sitting in the dark with eyes open. Colt stood in the doorway, one hand on the latch, one on the wool-wrapped child, his shirt shoulder dark from sweat drawn down. He looked at the ashpan for one beat, then turned to the porch. The bundle of kindling someone had once greased was pulled further from the stable wall. Wren tested it with her foot. The oil was cold, the sharp smell still faint on the wood surface. I rehung the thick curtain at the west window, pinned the wood peg at a slant, so it wouldn't stir when the wind changed. The tin cup on the table, mouth up, I poured in half a cup of warm water, letting the steam rise in a small column. At the gate, the bone-handled knife still sank deep into the old post. The wind moved, but the handle held, barely shifting now. Wren walked the floor, touching each thing as if checking presence. The wooden chest under the bed pinned one table leg, unmoved. The bricks under the west window lay flat. The fence wire outside was tight. The front latch at mid-notch. Wren dropped it to full, the click precise. The body counting time in its own way, a little faster. By the stove, the ashpan looked like a pond with no wind. The smaller piece of paper lay buried, and someone else's matter lay buried with it. The ink smell was gone. The ash kept it, not giving back. Colt crossed the porch, tapped the hammer on a roof beam by the stable, hearing more hollow than solid. He tied a wet burlap sack around one dry corner post. Slow. No hurry. Wren handed up a full bucket. The rim scraped the edge, a faint ket, like a cough cut short. The whole house moved quieter, as if avoiding any sound that might call something else here, until the cold stove hunched, drawing the fire down into itself. The ash lay even. The reversal happened like this: paper to ash, question to thing to clean up, and the latch in the place that spoke for the mouth. Wren opened the hatch with both hands, wrist straining on the right from the heavy old hinge. The earth smell came straight up, cold and steady. The wooden steps had darkened from damp. I went first by one step, left hand on the oil lamp, right hand free for balance. The wicker basket had been set since morning, lined with cloth dried in the sun, its edges folded together like an envelope's mouth. Wren took the child from Colt's chest. He didn't let go at once. Both thumbs still held the blanket edge, as if wind from somewhere might slip between wool and skin. Then he let go. No sound. We went down one step at a time. The lamp cast a small yellow ring on the earth wall, showing pebbles raised. The damp patches stood dark like writing in water. I breathed through my nose, my mouth dry. The basket went onto the cleared patch of floor. Wren laid the child in, wool across the tiny wrist. The faint green vein under the skin shone for a moment. The lamp wick was turned low, the flame shrinking to the wick's tip, like an eye squinting. Enough light to breathe, not so much to wake, not so little to fear the dark. Colt stood at the last step, his chest lifted shallow, not deep. He bent, touched the basket rim without touching skin. I heard his dry swallow, not thirst, but as if his throat remembered an old habit, to say, "All right." He didn't speak. The swallow caught, passed. Wren smoothed the wool once, her middle finger pressing along the frayed seam, to lay it flat, not uneven. The blanket's corner was folded sharp, tucked to the basket's side. Her hand left, but hovered a beat, break into sound. A choking moment didn't need to be seen. It happened inside, where throat and chest meet. Wren looked up at the hatch frame, a dark rectangle with bright edges. Then closed her eyes once, like a nod. She turned first, touching nothing, stepped up. I followed, eyes staying half a beat longer on the small wrist under the wool. Colt came last, his shoulder brushing the stair's underside, leaving a new dark mark. The hatch came down. The sound of wood on wood was as before, only this time it sat deeper. Wren wedged the shim in the seam, same way as practice. He pulled a stray straw from the edge, tossed it aside. I turned the lamp wick down to out. A thin smoke thread escaped, then gone. We stood straight. No one looked back at the hatch, not from forgetting, but from knowing exactly where it was in this house. The sky wasn't dark, just still. 4 horses took shape like wet letters, spreading, clearer with each dust beat. The red scarf on the lead rider's neck slapped his chest with each breath of the horse, the red smooth like fresh hide. The gun on his hip swung in a circle. Wren dropped the front latch down full. A click. Solid. Inside that sound was stone. Colt stood on the porch step, left foot on the higher tread, the rifle barrel across his chest like a brace. Not raised high, not lowered. On the soot mark from the day before, his boot toe left a clean half-moon. By the stable, the kindling bundle had been thrown closer to the wall when we hadn't seen. One of them struck a match, scraped it on the saddlebox. The fire caught quick from the oil left in some grain of wood. Its first sound wasn't loud. It ate first, then spoke. The sharp smoke went into the throat, like bark burning. The first bullet took tile. Shards slid down the roof, knocking together. I lay tight, in the dirt, run behind the chicken coop, stock jammed to my shoulder. Until the earth left a long mark on my shirt, Wren slid behind the stove wall, her back close enough to rasp the lime ridge with her shirt. The old trench, dug in haste last year, took back its use. We went to the places we had measured by step and breath. The red scarf rider edged his horse. Colt didn't shoot. He measured with his eyes the space from the horse's nose to the porch edge, from the dry river's lip to the fence post. Another rifle planks. The man near the chicken coop leaned to look into the dark corner. I squeezed the trigger once. He fell backward, hit in the thick between shoulder and chest, dropped into old baskets, straw flying. The heat in my ears eased slow, like sand poured into them. The third man threw a torch short. It broke mid-flight, fire dragging along the ground, before dying in the damp soil at the watering trough overflow from this morning. He cursed. His horse reared, white of the eyes showing. The fourth man stayed back, firing wild, bullets shaving the roof, more tiles falling. From the stove gap, Wren squeezed once, the shot biting into the saddle edge of the distant rider. He jerked his hand, torch falling into the saddle blanket, fire eating upward. He broke into a run, whipping in frenzy. The sound of leather on leather rushed. I heard Colt's breath from the porch, slow, steady. He shifted his stance by half a handspan, the rifle's muzzle moving with him, lowering to the exact height of a man. He didn't say back. No orders. Our house read each other by the weight and lightness of steps. The fire at the kindling had a voice now. It demanded air, pulling in with a rushing sound. I crawled to the water bucket, poured low, letting the water spill without splash. Water into the fire's mouth hissed, white steam lifting like momentary fog, then gone. The smoke changed smell from sharp to damp. I set the bucket on its side, mouth aimed at the kindling's root. The bricks under the west window didn't shift. Everything we had set earlier held its use. Colt fired a second time when the man at the stable's edge lifted his head. The rope in his hand dropped, his horse circling small before stopping, ears laid down. The body lay twisted, the smell of blood rising fast like fresh ground iron. I didn't look long. My eyes went back to water and fire. One left. He didn't shoot again. His legs tightened on the horse, turned half around, kicked hard. Dust trailed behind him, drawing a brown line away from the stable. The sound of hooves on stone thinned, then stopped. Fire still held at the kindling's edge, like someone holding a coal unwilling to spit it out. I poured again, the smell of wet wood rising dense. Wren traded places with me, her hands steady, eyes checking each ember. Colt lowered the rifle, the barrel's tip touching the step with a small knock. He didn't sit. He stayed where he was, shoulders down one notch, chest still even. Tiles on the roof dropped their last pieces, then stopped. Smoke crept along the rafters like a black cloth pulled thin. 2 bodies lay by the stable, one caught in a straw rack, one face down in dirt. The red scarf lay half in the brush, half out, color dulled by damp and clinging dust. His horse stood a few steps off, nose to the measured warmth. No one ran to the road. No one followed. The house stood still, like a person who had already placed half his body in his shadow, waiting for the other half to join it to fit. On the porch step, the half-moon Colt had left clean with his boot tip was still clear. He moved his toe into the dustier patch, nudging until the mark blurred. Not to erase it, only to bring everything to the same color. Wind passed through the sage, leaf against leaf, making a thin sound like coins falling on a wooden table. Enough to hear, not to name. Water struck the fire's eye, wood cracking dry. Each bucket tipped gave a hiss, white steam rising, clinging to hair and cloth like the smell of an old kitchen. The kindling blackened, the stick ends still red like a firefish eye refusing to close. Wren switched the bucket to her other hand, wrist sunk in a thin band of mud. She poured the last of the water at the stable post's base, where the fire had burned a brown ring. The wood gave small dry sounds like an old back stretching. The burn smell stayed at the trough. I scooped water, threw it in with a straw bundle soaked. The black sheen spread, stuck to the cloudy water ring, then sank. The horse stood angled, ears down, breathing smoke. I ran my fingers around the trough edge until the wood slid smooth again, without catch. On the porch, the rifle lay across my thigh. I pushed an oiled cloth through with the cleaning rod, turning, pulling it out. The cloth changed from gray to black, then paler. I changed cloth a second time, a third, until the steel shone still under the thin yellow of late sun. The breech took a thin line of grease. The locking sound neat, without hitch. Colt adjusted a roof beam at the scorched corner, wedged brick under the post. His sweat dropped into the dust, making a dark spot before vanishing. He didn't look at the 2 bodies by the stable. The front latch stayed closed since the start. Wren passed by, touched the latch head with her fingertip, left it there one beat, then let go. I opened the cellar hatch a crack, felt the cool earth air rise. The wool blanket inside lay across the child's shoulder, the breathing even, the lamp out, the dark gentle. I closed the hatch, wedged it. Above, the ash pan in the kitchen still flat, the ash edge holding to the pan's side like a dry sandbank. We didn't say, "It's done." Only the bucket mouth down to dry, the cloth hung on the nail, the rifle back on its usual hook. The burn smell at the trough stayed, like a sentence not yet given to anyone. We dug at the hill's edge, early season earth hard, the shovel biting with a knock, springing half scarf muddied, his eyes turned to earth. The other caught in the straw rack, hand still hooked in the snapped rein. Wren stood 2 steps off, arms across her apron, not covering her mouth, not turning away. The hair at her brow stuck in sweat strands, hanging down, drying on its own. I turned each shovel load, tipping the earth aside. The raw earth smell rose, without taste. My boots sank half deep, mud flattened under weight. Colt carried the body, set it down slow, letting the shoulder fall after the back, without drop. The second time he did the same, unchanged. Each mound was smoothed with the shovel's back. Wren picked flat stones from the grass edge, choosing ones without vein, without sharp edge, set them on top. She didn't tap them. She pressed her palm to each stone for 1 beat, then let go. No name, no mark. The wind coiled across the hill, bringing the smell of wet straw from the stable. I rinsed the shovel in the water left in the bucket, dried the blade with an old rag, set it in the wall rack, blade down. Colt filled the earth, patted the last handful in place. No one prayed. No one looked long at the fresh mounds. We stepped back, turned to the yard. At the edge, the feather caught in the sage still hung as at noon. I didn't pull it. The way from hill to house felt longer, not from weight but from quiet, and quiet always made time heavier. The sheriff stopped by, not dismounting. Front hooves struck stone twice, dry, then still. He lifted the hat brim an inch, eyes passing the gate, the post, resting on the latched door. His other hand lay loose on the saddle, middle finger over an old crack. No paper in his hand, the stillness enough to hear the bit rings rub. Dust clung to his trouser leg, shifting its color 1 tone before falling. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't measure marks, didn't follow hoof lines. Wren stood on the porch, arms at her side, 1 finger unconsciously touching the thin rust line on the latch head. I set the tin cup upside down on the table, rim to wood in a sound enough to hear. Colt stood just inside, shoulder to the doorframe, rifle off-hand, hanging on its usual hook by the post. The sheriff touched his hat brim, lowered it. The horse turned, tail sweeping the wild pineapple row in a short rustle. He pulled the reins. No paper came from him. The reversal here happened without words, only by him leaving without bringing or taking. When their dust had settled, the latch stayed where it was, weight unchanged. I brushed a single grain from the table. It rolled a short way, stopped at the edge. We let go of the sense of waiting for more. The house went back to small work, like a carpenter returning to plane the last edge. Under the bed, my hand touched wood finer than a black-covered ledger, edge polished from handling. A cloth-wrapped gun with its oil long gone. Colt looked. His eyes passed over the money, stopped at the ledger, then moved on. He closed the lid with both hands, enough force for the hinge to give a small cut. Wren slid the chest to the table's short-legged, long propped with wood scraps. The table stood level, stopped rocking. She set her father's old guitar on top. Strings rusted, soundboard split with a fine line. Papers from threat became table wedge. No change of owner, no change of name. They changed use. I didn't open the ledger. The money lay still, padding under the guitar like soil packed into a house's foundation. The gun went back to the chest bottom, muzzle to the wall, not toward anyone. Wren wiped the chest's edge, her hand leaving 1 clean line in the dust, stopping there. Colt sat straight in the chair, thumb rubbing an old callus without thought. The twist here was cold. What could feed became what steadied a table leg. What could kill became weight holding it down. The house stood firmer. That was all. I set a slip of paper under the cup to keep water rings off the newly leveled table. The slip was blank. I wrote nothing on it. Set the cup down, its base marking a clean circle, not bleeding. Late rain, not heavy. Dark streaks fell on the yard. Like brush tests on paper, Wren set a tin basin under the leaking eave, the drops tapping in even beats, unhurried, like a stranger knocking with a tired knuckle. The smell of earth opened after each cluster, blowing across the porch, where Colt's boot, half-moon, had been clear that afternoon. I pulled the bone-handled knife from the gatepost. Dry mud in the groove flaked away under a wet rag. The handle's old sweat shine dulled under my rubbing. I rinsed it clean, dried it, hung it on the nail by the stove under the wooden ladle. It hung there, quiet, lighter than in the wind, only a hanging thing now. The front latch was lifted one notch. The crack, just enough for rain smell to enter the kitchen. The tin cup sat, mouth up on the sill, catching 3 drops before I turned it sideways to keep from filling. The wool blanket in the cellar was shaken out gently by Wren. Laid again across the child's shoulder, she smoothed the frayed seam once. Stopped. Water in the basin made small rings, meeting, overlapping, then done. The yard lost its dust. The trough lost its smoke smell. Only the scent of new wet wood left. The horse shifted feet, exhaling long like someone freed from a stone in their shoe. We sat spaced just so, each with a small task. I wiped the rifle barrel one last time before the ash still. The morning's paper lay beneath, turned into something unreadable. The house breathed even. The earth outside took the rain down to root, asking no one. We didn't say, safe, only listened to the drops counting, like someone who isn't asleep, but no longer needs to stay awake. The porch had been cleared smooth. Afternoon slid across the boards like a warm hand. I swept slowly, the straw broom whispering, as I pushed dust tight to the base of the wall and tipped it into a tin pan with a flared, battered lip. The sweepings were a mingled lot, tiny flakes of charcoal, gray wool fibers, 2 dry grains of rice, a curled sprig of sage shaped like a child's hand. Wren crouched to one side, teased a fine splinter from the crack between boards, thumb holding, index nail prying, drew it free and set it in my palm. Light as a wisp of smoke. She let it fall into the pan. Colt set his boots just inside the door, toes toward the yard, heels touching, the space between the shafts even and true. Dry mud cracked off the welt, leaving a pale salt ring half faded by the late rain. He wiped with a finger, then stopped, not rubbing it out. Along the lower seam, a single thread had worked loose and stuck out like a fishhook. Wren spread the wool blanket on the porch in the brightest square of light. She snapped it twice so the dust shook loose, the fibers prickling up and settling down. Thicker over the patch, thinner at the hem corner, it looked like a borrowed piece of ground, flat enough, imperfect enough. With the heel of her hand, she smoothed the frayed seam so the rough didn't catch the skin. The child lay on his belly, then pushed up awkwardly, elbows a handspan apart, palms patting the wool, a warm scent lifting. He shoved at the cushion and lifted his belly off the blanket, hips rocking side to side, chin rasping the coarse nap. Breath hissed through his nose, small. I set my hand ahead of him in case he slid. I didn't pick him up. He studied Colt's boots by the door. His gaze ran from a scuff on the toe into the shadowed throat of the shaft, and stopped on a lace tied crooked by half a finger's width. One hand crept out of the blanket, the thumb stiff. He touched the boot's toe and drew back from the chill. The second time his forefinger went slow and came to rest on a nick along the leather edge. The boot stood as a grown man stands to listen. A light breeze moved over the grass bank, carrying damp earth and the dry of old sage. The porch no longer spoke where a board had lifted. I'd set it down with long nails that morning, the heads flat as little coins. Wren tucked a folded cloth beneath the child's head so his chin wouldn't scrape the wool. The cloth met the weave with a faint, private rasp. Colt sat on the second step, hands on his knees, looking through the notch in another half-handspan, and flopped, brow into the blanket, rolling over my fingers. I stroked once, lightly, from crown to mid-back. No more. The blanket held its crease and didn't slide. I dragged the tin pan from under the table and blew the dust once more. It rolled, reached the edge of the boot, and lay still. The boots kept their true stance, like fence posts that don't lean. Behind us, the old guitar on the wooden chest stayed quiet. In the light wind, its rusted strings just kissed a bright hair-fine ring. And the afternoon stretched itself by way of small tasks. I gauged by eye where to lay the blanket next time, so it would fall in the same bright square. Wren nudged the porch chair a little so no one would scuff the blanket's edge. Colt drew the boots in by a handspan as the sun withdrew, so the child wouldn't touch the dried mud. Everything found its place without needing a name. We left the door latch at the middle notch. The house timbers had drunk the night rain and were giving it back slowly, making the latch a touch heavier. When I brushed it by accident, a very soft click lifted, a bead tapping a bowl's rim. Short, neat. It went once around the kitchen and was gone. Wren steadied the latch head with a finger on the thin line of rust and held it there, neither down nor up. Evening light reached farther into the room than yesterday by an inch or two. On the table, the soot trace from the day we burned the papers still drew a fine gray line. I had wiped at it with a damp rag, with weak liquor, with warm water. It never left, only paled, then came back as the wood dried. Wren turned a cloth over it and stopped right at the edge, not hiding it. She wasn't put out. The mark lay there like a guiding thread between meals, a reminder of what had been set down and left as it was. I slid the tin cup across the table. The base caught the soot and dragged a short path, not entirely smooth. When it stopped, the water ring embraced half the gray line, shone a moment, and sank into the wood. The table stood firm on the chest beneath it. The chest pushed the plank up to its right height and cured the tremor. The old guitar lay on top, and its wire drew a hairline of light like monofilament strung thin across the air. In the kitchen, the wooden ladle hung under the bone-handled knife, the ladle's grip darkened by hands. The knife lay still, no longer casting a slant of light on the ashpan. The lamp oil smell had gone. A sift of flour clung at the table's edge. I scraped with a fingernail. The flour rolled into a fine white line the length of a rice grain, came up against the soot and split. Colt passed and touched the latch so lightly it was only a weighing of it. No sound. He washed his hands in the basin. 3 drops scattered, struck the soot and slid through the door's thin opening and went straight to the west window, giving the curtain one small stir. The wooden pegs held. The fabric did not swing wide. I pressed a fingertip to the gray line, cooler than the rest of the plank. No particular thought went through me. I drew my hand back and wiped it on my shirt. On the porch, the child turned, and the blanket rustled softly. I looked over and saw the wool rise in one place like a ribbon of earth rucked by wind. Wren stood in a doorway, between kitchen and porch, leaning her back lightly to the jamb. She watched a beat, then crossed, and with the tip of her shoe tucked the blanket closer. The latch stayed at its middle, like a person listening, neither sending away nor inviting in. I lifted the tin cup. Its rim brushed my tooth with the faintest ring. The water was still warm and gave off a slow breath. I drank and set it back exactly where it had been, so the base covered half the soot again. Click. The latch sounded once more when the wind turned. We let it speak for itself, and let it be. I walked out to the gate, only the round hole where the knife had been. Black as a small eye looking straight on, the wood around it darkened by sweat and the late rain. I set my fingertip into it, not through, just to the hard grain. Behind it, the evening slipped through the fence and made a thin halo of light. An ant crossed the rim, paused, turned down, and vanished into the thick grass. Wind moved lengthwise through the sage row, and the old leaves lost their bite. The fence wire chimed once and fell quiet. The twists I'd set yesterday lay true. A sparrow dropped onto the third post, pecked at the small hole of an old nail, lifted its head and was gone. In the stall the horse changed feet, flicked a grain of straw from the hoof, and let out a loose breath. I cupped the tin cup in both hands. Heat moved from the metal into my palms, slow and sure, easing the tight in my knuckles. I drew in the faint scent of thin coffee, no fragrance now, only warmth. The lip touched mine and the metal gave one last thread of cool before it warmed. Wren came from the house and folded the wool blanket in two. She didn't snap it hard, only smoothed it once and folded it from the patched side toward the thin edge. The crease lay true at the center, the wool crossing like two fields meeting at their line. She set the blanket on the step and left half of it outside so the sun could smooth away the damp. The child slept. I saw his lashes quiver once and go still. Farther off at the west window, Colt leaned back to check the brick wedge. He wiped a strip had passed there and had been pulled free. The knife hung by the stove, not pointing at anyone, not heavy in any hand. The chest under the table pinned its leg firm, and the guitar lay on top, strings quiet. Inside, the soot line on the table was still there. The latch hadn't changed its notch. The blanket lay folded in two. The boots stood balanced. The wicker basket in the cellar sat a finger's breadth nearer the wall. A trace of Wren's hand, saving room for a new cloth. A flock of someone's sheep passed far off. Bells at their throats came in faint and were gone in the wind. The sky wasn't bluer, only held less dust. The wheel ruts on the road stayed dry and scored. No one rubbed them out. No need. I tapped the cup against my knee and listened for the single low note of metal. Wren stood beside me, warmed the back of her hand with her breath, and rubbed it smooth. A thin rim of dust still ringed her nails. The sun caught it and drew an uneven band of light. She bent, plucked a feather snagged at the sage root, and tossed it over the fence for the wind to take. We did not count the days. We did not name what had passed. We did not shift the latch just to hear the click again. The earth under the porch stayed stubborn, kept drinking the leftover rain, and made no sound. The house held each object where we'd set it. Our breath went out, struck the tin cup's cold face, and drew back. The earth heard us breathing and kept still. The house had found its own tempo again. The wool blanket folded in two on the step, the latch resting at the middle notch, the soot line on the table, thin as a thread no one bothers to tie. At the gate, there was only the round hole where the knife had been. In the kitchen, the tin cup warming slowly. Beneath the table, the wooden chest, keeping the plank from wandering. Folk of the wind country don't mend each other with words. They work in small acts, putting things back where they belong, leaving a modest slit of light, letting an old paper become a wedge under a table. What to keep, what to release. Sometimes the difference is only a single notch on the latch. If something still catches in your throat, try telling it with a thing, a blanket, a scrap of paper, or the place where your house latch likes to rest. Leave a small mark beneath this porch. A sentence, a single word will do. Night asks for little talk. The earth hears us breathe and keeps still.